Welcome back to History's Hidden Corners. On the night the Titanic struck the iceberg, wealth still shimmered on the surface. Crystal glasses sat half finished. Dinner jackets were folded neatly over chairs. Gold watches were on people's wrists that had never known hunger or cold. For the wealthiest passengers aboard, this voyage was meant to be effortless. And then the ship shuddered. The sea was calm. The stars were sharp. The kind of night that feels too peaceful to end badly. When the iceberg struck, it didn't scream. It whispered. A shudder. A pause. And then the slow realization that something was wrong. Stewards knocked on doors in middle of the night, not gently, not casually, but with a firmness that broke through sleep and confusion. Passengers opened their eyes to strangers in uniforms standing in dimly lit corridors, saying words that sounded unreal. Put on your life coats. Come up on deck. There's no danger, just a precaution. They woke people who had no idea their lives had already begun to change. They wrapped scarves around their necks, already trembling from cold and fear. They lifted children from warm beds and placed them into arms that weren't fully awake yet. And when passengers asked questions, is it serious? Are we safe? What do we do? The stewards answered as calmly as they could, even when they didn't fully know the truth themselves. They gave direction they hoped were correct. Some were still serving tea as panic spread, not because they didn't understand the danger, but because calm was part of the job. A cup placed into shaking hands, a familiar routine in an unfamiliar moment, something ordinary to cling to while the world tilted. Stewardess moved through the chaos with purpose. They guided women and children towards the lifeboats. They helped them step over railings. They adjusted life jackets, and they spoke softly when the voices around them were loud. And then, when the boats were full, they stepped back, not because they lacked courage, but because they understood the unspoken rule. There'd be no space for them. Some watched lifeboats lower down while the deck beneath them slanted more sharply with every minute. Some stood holding their hands together to stop the shaking. Some returned below to help others, knowing there would be no return. Their work was quiet, no speeches, no last words recorded, no dramatic gestures meant to be remembered. Their courage was invisible, woven into acts that looked like routine and felt like obedience, but were in truth a form of sacrifice. Their survival rate was very low. And when history remembers the Titanic, it often remembers the rich, the famous, the romantic. But it was never about the people that worked on deck, moving door to door, coat to coat, child to child, who held the line between order and chaos for as long as it could be held. They did not save themselves. They saved time, and time saved lives. The wireless operators stayed at their post as water crept closer, not rushing, not panicking, listening instead to the hiss, the crackle of the set, the thin thread connecting them to a world that did not yet know the ship was dying. They sent distress calls again and again, SOS, CQD, over and over, tapping into the dark. Each message carried coordinates, urgency, hope. Each one said the same thing in a different way. We are still here. We need help. Please answer. They ignored messages telling them to stop. Other ships complained about interference, about broken sleep. about their routines being interrupted. But the operators understood something those distant voices could not. This was no routine. This was the difference between silence and survival. They kept transmitting as the ship tilted, as the floor grew slick beneath their feet, as water lapped closer to their knees. The wireless room was never meant to flood. By the time it did, it was already too late. They sent messages until power failed, until the lights flickered, until the signal was weak and the keys fell silent beneath their numb fingers. Those signals are the reason ships came. Not fast enough to save everyone, but fast enough to save some. They are the reason lifeboats were not lost in the Atlantic. The reason voices were heard in the dark. The reason names appeared on survivor lists instead of memorials. They were not heroes by title. They were employees, young men paid to transmit weather reports and passenger messages. No command authority, no obligation to stay. But they stayed anyways. They stayed because they understood that as long as the signal lived, there was hope. And when the last message was sent, when the airways fell silent, the world did not yet know what it owed them, but the living did. Jacob Astor was standing on deck with his young wife, Madeline. She was pregnant, only 18. Astor had crossed oceans before. He has built hotels, invented devices, shaped cities. This, he believed, was a delay, not an ending. When the lifeboats were called, he helped Madeline step forward, adjusted her coat, and asked an officer politely and calmly if he might join her. The answer was no. Astor stepped back without protest. He watched the boat lower into the dark. Power had never failed him before. That night, it did. Nearby, a man named Benjamin returned to his cabin and changed his clothes, not into something warm, into evening wear, a crisp shirt, a tailored jacket. He told a steward he was prepared to go down like a gentleman. Witnesses later saw him seated in a lounge chair smoking as water crept closer. It wasn't denial, it was a choice. If this was to be the end, he would meet it on his own terms. Further along the deck, a man was offered a seat in a lifeboat. He shook his head. He had lived a long life, others had not. When his wife, Ida, was urged to go without him, she refused. She stepped back to his side and took his hand. They were last seen sitting together, the chaos moving around them, as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them. No fortune, no future plans, just presence. Not every wealthy passenger died, but survival did not come without consequences. Some lived under suspicion, some under guilt, and some under headlines that never stopped questioning whether the money had tipped the scales. Because the Titanic did something no balance sheet could undo. It stripped wealth of its illusion. In the freezing dark of the Atlantic, status meant nothing without time. And times ran out equally for kings and clerks alike. The rich did not face the ocean differently. They faced it as humans, choosing dignity, devotion, restraint, or silence. And those choices, not their fortunes, are what remained. A woman who refused to wait. Most people know her as Molly Brown, loud, fearless, unsinkable. But the night of April 14th, 1912, she was simply Margaret Brown, a woman standing on the deck of a ship she had been told could not fail. Margaret did not panic. She did not wait either. She moved through the first-class corridors, helping women into lifebelts, urging them to dress warmly. Some resisted, some laughed nervously, some insisted the ship was safer than a small wooden boat. Margaret didn't argue, she insisted. When it came time for the lifeboats, she helped others step forward and then found herself pulled into a lifeboat number 6 against her will. She didn't want to go. As the boat lowered into the black water, the sounds changed. Music drifted from the deck. Voices carried over the sea. Inside the boat, fear settled in like frost. Margaret picked up an oar. She began rowing, not gracefully, not quietly, but with purpose. She urged the others to keep moving, to keep warm, to stay awake. And then she did the unthinkable. She demanded they turn back. There were people in the water. She could hear them. The officer in charge refused, afraid the boat could be swamped. Margaret argued, she pleaded, she scolded, and in the end, they did not turn back far enough. That decision would haunt her. Hours later, when the rescue ship appeared, Margaret did not collapse in relief. She stood up. Aboard the ship, she became something else entirely. She translated for immigrants who couldn't speak English. She gathered blankets, raised money on the spot, cash, jewelry, and promises to help those who had lost everything. While others slept and stared into silence, Margaret took notes, needs, names, stories. She made sure the living were cared for and that the dead were not forgotten. Later, the newspapers would rename her. They would exaggerate her voice, her manner, her courage, until Molly Brown became a character larger than life. Margaret hated that version because the truth was quieter. She had been decisive. She hadn't been unsinkable. She had been unwilling to be passive. And long after the ship was gone, long after the water closed around the wreck, she carried the weight of that night, not as a badge of survival, but as a responsibility. Because Margaret Brown didn't believe surviving was the end of the story. She believed it was the beginning. And that's the part people forget. Edward Smith was last seen on the bridge. He did not attempt escape. His final actions were debated, but his end was not. He went down with his ship as tradition demanded. What the night revealed was some people fought, not with fists or weapons, but with urgency. They pushed through crowds, argued with officers, clung to railings, refused to step back when told to wait. Their fighting was instinctive, fueled by fear and adrenaline, by the raw refusal to disappear quietly into the dark. For some, that fight saved them. For others, it only bought a few more minutes. Some people waited. They stood where they were told to stand. They trusted the rules, the uniform, the reassurance that this ship was not going to sink. They waited for instructions, for permission, for their turn, believing order would protect them. Many of them never realized the cost of waiting until it was already too late. Some people loved until the end. They chose closeness over survival. Husbands helped wives into lifeboats and stepped back. Wives refused to leave husbands behind. Parents wrapped children in coats, pressed kisses to their forehead, and lied gently, "You'll be fine. I will see you soon." In those final moments, love wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, deliberate, and devastatingly final. Some people did survive and carried the weight of survival forever. They lived long lives haunted by the sound of screams fading into silence. by the image of empty lifeboats drifting on a black sea, by the knowledge that survival was not always earned, deserved, or chosen. Sometimes it was simply assigned by chaos. Many never stopped asking, "Why me?" Some never spoke of the night again. Others told the story over and over, trying to make sense of a moment that never fully made sense. The Titanic wasn't just a tragedy of ice and steel, it was a collision between human belief and reality, between trust and time, between who we think we are and who we become when the rules collapse. It was a collection of final choices made in minutes: to move or to stay, to hold or to let go, to save oneself or save someone else. And that is why the story endures. Because beneath the history, beneath the headlines and numbers, the Titanic asks a question that never stops echoing. If you only have minutes, would you choose yourself or someone else? If you enjoyed this episode of History's Hidden Corners, there are many more stories just like this, waiting where you least expect them.